Hello everyone, it's Ola, and we're finally going to be moving on to having a look at some filters today, which is a lot of fun. It's where like most of the fun in After Effects is. Obviously we had to kind of explain all the other stuff in and around so that you're not fumbling around these panels, but I think I've pretty much explained everything on here, except for maybe the puppet tool, but I'll do that later on or in a separate... the puppet tool is kind of a filter anyway, so in my book, that's a filter, and so we're going to be covering that in a filters lesson. So what we're going to do is just literally go down the filters every day, and I'm just going to be pointing out ones that I find useful, and maybe ones that aren't so useful, and why they're not useful, and good practice, and you know the ones I think you should be using, the ones I think you should avoid. So I'm going to ignore the 3D channel right now because they're quite specific in that you need to be dealing with 3D files. Like a lot of these, like extractor is for extracting certain channels from really like from EXRs, basically EXR, which is a kind of image, but where you can store different levels of different maps basically. So you can store different channels like red channel, depth channels, and all this kind of stuff into one file, which is pretty cool. But it's really specialized, and for you guys starting out today, I don't think that's really going to be necessary. So what we are going to start is the blur and sharpen menu. Now you might think if you've seen one blur, you've seen them all, but let's try and dispel that myth today and explain some of the stuff about the blur filters. And I'm just going to go down and hopefully just point out some stuff as we go down that I find useful for some of these. Bilateral blur is kind of cool because it flattens out the detail. So if we have a look here, keep an eye on his arm. Now as you can see here, or maybe like the curtains is even better. Watch as I toggle this on and off. So that's off and then on. And what you see is it kind of flattens the areas in between. And the speakers, again, if you have a look here, especially on this one, like we have all the detail where the grill is. And then it just really softens it out. So this is a really good filter if you're trying to build a cartoon look. Now obviously there's a cartoon filter in After Effects, but this is a really good start in terms of if you want to do a kind of flat cel shaded kind of Zelda Wind Waker style look. Again, if you look at his arms here, we've got all this detail where his hair is, and this is just going to flatten everything out. Now this in combination with something like Find Edges or something like that to actually then add some edges back in is really useful in terms of and also like a posterize, which is then gonna add some some kind of color detail back in. But you can get really creative with these kinds of effects, and so that's mainly what I use bilateral blur for. I wouldn't use it for anything else. I certainly wouldn't use it if I was trying to blur something out. But again, it's just to show, like box blur I don't really like that much, and I'll show you why. The blur itself I find ugly, although the filter itself is quite fast. If you look at when things blur out, so if we look here on the corner of the Young Idol logo, you're going to see like it's basically going to blur into a box or a square. And there's other plugins in here that do kind of the same thing but way better. It is fast, to be fair, but again, not a look I kind of go for. This, on the other hand, the camera lens blur, completely different. This is one of the slowest filters in After Effects, but what this does is it attempts to generate a real depth of field effect. So it's definitely the one I would recommend if you're trying to build realistic depth of field, especially with your 3D renders and stuff. Now, as you can see, I've cranked this up really high, so maybe let's do like 150. You saw how long that took to calculate, and that's just the price you're gonna have to pay. Again, I have a fast machine, but maybe we're going too high again, maybe 80. And what I'm going to show you here is, as you can see, things are blurring out to hexagons at the moment. Now you can change this by changing the roundness. And what this is going to attempt to do is like round that out to, if you've got a camera, you will know these things are called bokeh. And it's the kind of look you get when you're blurring things out or you've got depth of field with a nice lens. And so After Effects is attempting to do that if we bring that If we bring it down, we're going to have these in hexagons, and again it depends on the kind of look you're going for. Like you can even have triangles if you want. Why you would want to do that is not quite clear to me, but just so you know it's there. Then you have highlight and gain. So what this does is if we turn the gain up, we're not going to see much happen. We're going to see it a bit in the bright areas, but what this attempts to do is in the bright areas like really blow out the things. But if we bring the threshold down, we're going to see the effect being a lot more pronounced. Now this is obviously way more than I would ever, but basically you can kind of attempt to, if I put repeat edge pixels here so we don't get this fringing, you can really attempt to kind of like blow out the highlights and give this really stylized look to your depth of field. The other good thing is with this plugin is that it works with gradients as well. So there's two ways. If you were coming out of a 3D program, you could do something called a depth matte, which is a kind of black and white image where white would be everything that's in focus and black would be defocused, or you can invert it as well. So I can show you that real quick by doing, I'm going to create a fake depth matte. So if I come to fill here, I'm going to make a linear gradient, and I'm just going to do it the size of this comp here. And if I come into the rectangle and I'm going to attempt to do something along the lines of this, and I'm going to hide it because we don't really need to see it. And then in my depth matte, I'm going to choose my shape layer. Now as you can see here, we've got everything blurred out down here, and then everything up there is in focus. We can invert that, which would be kind of like what we were trying to do. So obviously I've got this horrible highlight at the moment and the threshold's too high. But if I brought this down to something like 10, you would see the effects be a lot more subtle. Now I wouldn't ever do it with a gradient unless I was doing like a landscape. Obviously here you would have to create something a lot more custom if you wanted to add that depth of field. So I would have to mask Neil out and make him like make like a black shadow for him in the depth matte, and combine that, and you would have to do that completely separately. But you can see pretty quick like how you can get some quite cool looks with the depth of field. So camera lens blur is super useful. Definitely recommend checking out. Cross blur is cool in terms of like you can create these streaks, and that's about it really. It's called cross blur because you can do up and down, and so then you get these kind of crosses. And again, you can repeat the edge pixels, but with stuff like this, what I would generally do is kind of only do it in one direction. Maybe duplicate the top layer and then change that to like an add, and then remove it from the bottom layer, or maybe screen, and then just like really bring the opacity down. But I don't tend to use it that much because you can do this kind of effect with a glow, which will let you be a lot more selective as well as to where the highlights will be. So I don't really use it all that much. Radial fast blur and radial blur are pretty much similar. They create this kind of effect, and you'll see there's another one down here called radial blur, which does pretty much the same thing. And on the radial blur, at least you get preview. But you can also do the zoom, which is this kind of like this kind of zoom in the middle look, which is being done to death if you've ever watched a frag video or anything like that. And you can choose the quality of the blurring up here and stuff. So that's what those do. Channel blur is interesting because you can create some kind of subtle fringing effects which would be difficult to get otherwise. Now let's have a look. So what this allows you to do is blur each channel. Now if I blur the red channel slightly, we're going to see that we get this kind of like chromatic aberration sort of fringing, and a lot of the advanced glow plugins that don't come with After Effects kind of have this option built in, so it allows you to basically just blur out the some of the channels, and you can get some really interesting effects, especially if you then overlay this on top of your original footage. So as you can see here, this in itself is kind of like a trippy look, and so you can get some really interesting effects just by messing about with these. But the way I would use this is you can use it creatively. So if I duplicate this, and change this to something like the difference blend mode. Let me just do that on here. So if I change that to difference, on the bottom one, I'm going to change the channel, and then that way this allows us to kind of like isolate the red channel, and then I could pre-comp these two together as we saw yesterday if you've watched the pre-comp, and you know, add something like a glow, and you know, bring the threshold down, and you got like a kind of like Terminator heat seeker effect, which could be kind of cool, I guess. So I'm going to undo that there. So that's why I think channel blur is like one of the more useful ones if you get creative with it. Fast directional blur, compound blur I don't ever use. I'll show you that real quick, but you know, it makes this horrible, it's just a mess. It's literally like my least favorite plugin out of all the blurs. Directional blur is cool for this kind of, again, it's kind of like the cross blur but only in one direction, but at least you can actually keyframe the direction, and so you can create some kind of streaking effects with that. Fast blur is my go-to blur if I just want to blur something out. Look out, they call it fast for a reason. It's because it's really quick to calculate, and again, you can also do horizontal only, so you could do this, but it's just such a versatile blur. It's probably the one I use the most. Gaussian blur is kind of the same, but it doesn't have the option to blur out the edges, which is really annoying. So you can see here, you're always going to get fringing. It's actually a slightly nicer blur than fast blur, but I barely use it because of that very reason. Radial blur I showed you earlier. Reduce interlace flicker is if you have interlacing. Sharpen and unsharp mask is the complete opposite, so you attempt to sharpen your image. Don't really use these that much. Come into here, and you know, you can sharpen the image, but then you're going to start to see artifacting, like you see the little squares. Not sure how clear that will be on YouTube, but you know, watch my Photoshop tutorials on what I think about sharpening. Last but not least is the smart blur, which is actually kind of like the bilateral blur in terms of like it softens the details, and so again we've got this kind of cartoon look going on, especially if I bring this down to like 2. Very slow plugin, but the way I find this useful is if you change this to edge only, you can get this really cool black and white kind of like sketchy effect, and there are implications. Again, keep an eye on, like, I'm going to try and preview this real quick, but you can get this kind of like sketch look, which can be quite interesting. If you a lot of the effects in After Effects, you have to see them as a first step, and you can be like, okay, how can I overlay this? How can I work this into something else? How can I mess with this further to make this look more customized? But if I preview this area on my timeline, you're going to see, yeah, it's kind of pretty cool black and white effects, and yeah, there could be lots of creative implications for this. So that's blurs for today. Hope you enjoyed that. Let me know what you think in the comments. Like, comment, subscribe, etc. And I will see you tomorrow, hopefully, for some more filters. Thanks for watching, guys. As always, see you soon.